Thank you. I'm very honored to be here with President Guaido, with my good friends, Erwin Kotler, Vanessa Neumann, Jared Genscher, and I'm looking forward to sharing a few thoughts about getting the bad guys in Venezuela. I have a lot of experience with bad guys in Russia. For those of you who don't know me, I was an investor in Russia in the 1990s and 2000s. I started to expose corruption in the Putin regime, and as a result, I was expelled from the country. My offices were raided. My lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, was arrested. He was tortured for 358 days, and he was murdered in November 2009, more than 11 years ago. Since then, I've been on a mission to get justice and facing the same type of questions that you're asking yourself today, which is when you have a criminal regime, and Vanessa, your point is a very good one, which is that human rights and kleptocracy are completely intermingled. But when you have a criminal regime, like you do in Russia, like you do in Venezuela, like there are in a number of other places, what do you do? And Erwin laid out a checklist of actions that need to be taken, starting with the International Criminal Court, the UN, et cetera. And all those actions are great if one can get them moving. But one thing, it's one thing to run a case at the International Criminal Court, which can take decades. And it's another thing to get justice today. And the idea that we came up with after Sergei Magnitsky's murder was that the people who killed him for money. And the people who get that money don't keep that money in Russia, just like the crooks in the Maduro regime don't keep their money in Venezuela. They keep their money in New York, in London. They buy properties in the south of France and in Spain. And they send their kids to boarding school in Switzerland and in England. And those people we can target by freezing their ability to spend their money in the West and to stop them from traveling to the West. And it may not sound like such a terrible consequence for somebody who's committed torture and murder, but it's better than no consequence at all. And that became the concept behind the Magnitsky Act. And I took this idea originally to Washington, and I shared it with a Democratic senator from Maryland, Benjamin Cardin, and a Republican senator from Arizona, the late John McCain. And I said, can we ban the visas and freeze the assets of the people who killed Sergei Magnitsky? And they said yes. And that became known as the Magnitsky Act. Originally, when I first proposed it, it was just a piece of legislation for Sergei Magnitsky. But after they put it onto the law books, their phones started ringing. And all these other victims in Russia said, you found the Achilles heel of the Putin regime. Can you sanction the people who killed my husband, my brother, my sister, my aunt? And after about a dozen of these calls, these two senators said, wait a second, we're onto something much bigger than just one case. And they added 65 words to the law to sanction all gross human rights abusers in Russia. It went for a vote in the Senate. It passed 92-4. It passed the House of Representatives with 89%. And it became a federal law in the United States on December 14, 2012. And Putin went out of his mind. Vladimir Putin, in retaliation, banned the adoption of Russian orphans by American families. And these were orphans that were often sick and crippled and sometimes wouldn't survive if they hadn't been adopted. So Putin was effectively sentencing some of his orphans to death in retaliation to the Magnitsky Act. He then made it his single largest foreign policy priority to repeal the Magnitsky Act and stop it from spreading. So when these senators saw this, instead of being intimidated by any of his actions, they said, wait a second, if Putin is responding this way, there sure are a lot of other dictators, kleptocrats, who deserve the same treatment. And so they introduced the Global Magnitsky Act. And in 2016, the Global Magnitsky Act passed. And the Global Magnitsky Act takes those same sanctions, visa bans and asset freezes, and applies them to torturers and murderers and kleptocrats anywhere in the world. Now, following the United States passage of the Magnitsky Act, I've been working for a decade with Erwin Kotler here on this call, who is a superhero in the world of human rights. And we got Canada to unanimously pass the Canadian Global Magnitsky Act in both houses of Parliament. And a week after they passed the Global Magnitsky Act, all of Magnitsky's, or not all of them, but most of Magnitsky's killers were sanctioned. But also on the first list were a bunch of crooks from the Maduro regime. It was the first sanctions list and included Venezuelan officials. Since the United States and Canada, we have Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Kosovo, who all have Magnitsky Acts. The British Parliament passed the Magnitsky Act in 2018 and implemented it in July of this year. And probably the biggest milestone is coming up soon, which is the EU. The EU just distributed the text of an EU Magnitsky Act to all member states yesterday. And rumor has it that it should be in place and ready to go by December. Now, the EU Magnitsky Act is not ideal. It doesn't include kleptocracy like the US and Canada, and we're working on that. Nor does the UK Magnitsky Act include kleptocracy, and we're working on that. And the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, promised me that they would make an amendment and to include kleptocracy. So we have a tool. It's a tool that has already been applied to Venezuela and can be applied further. I'm very happy that the Magnitsky Act addresses, at least scratches the surface of the terrible injustices that the Venezuelan people have suffered from these crooks who have taken over the country illegally. And I think going forward that Venezuela will be continue to be one of the countries that gets more people sanctioned in all of these jurisdictions. And I'll certainly do whatever I can to support your cause in my conversations with these governments around the world, because I can't think of a more extreme situation than the one you're facing. Thank you.